to ask your questions. We just have 1 hour, so it's quite tight. And we have 3 amazing speakers this morning to speak about the shape-up method and their feedback about it. So maybe at the end of each section, you will see we have prepared a deck. At the end of each section, you can ask your questions. Maybe it will be easier like that. I'll leave the mic to our 3 speakers. Maybe Alexandre, do you want to begin and introduce yourself and your background?
Hello everyone, can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Perfect. So yes, my name is Alex. I'm CPO and co-founder at Bleton. A few words about me. So I have both a business and engineering background. I learned product management in Silicon Valley and then worked for several startups back in Paris. We co-founded Bleton 5 years ago, basically to bring innovation to the healthcare industry. So our main product is a secure messaging app for healthcare professionals. And we have a team about 120 people with 50 people in product and engineering. And I leave the mic to Gabriel.
Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me all right? Yes, great. So my name's Gabriel. I'm the product lead at Allen. I joined Allen just under 11 months ago. So I've had a full COVID experience of remote confined work. Before that, I was in San Francisco for 6 years, 5 of which I spent at Stripe. And the previous company that I had started in France was acquired by Stripe in 2014. For those who aren't familiar with Allen, we are about 4 years old, just under 5 years old actually now. And we provide a fair, friendly, and frictionless healthcare insurance in France to just over 140,000 people, but also in Spain and Belgium. So we're also trying to get healthcare into the 21st century in a slightly different way than our friends at Bleton, but all with a common goal. Right, Julien, over to you.
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Julien. I am the lead product manager at Memo Bank, and I'm also the first employee there. Memo Bank is a new bank for SMBs. We launched the product 6 months ago in France. And about my background, I started product management right after business school. And I've done 3 companies. I've worked at 3 companies since then in product management.
All right. So let's get started. But maybe before we start, I'd like to know who among you is familiar with the shape-up methodology. So can you maybe just say in the chat a couple words, whether you know about it, whether you implement it in your company, so that we can basically provide more context. So anyway, while you're answering, I'll start. So shape-up is a methodology, is a method by Basecamp. So they have really a new way to structure how development works, which is original. And so I'll share some basic principle about their method. So the first idea is to organize product and engineering around 6-week cycles. So the idea is that if you do just 2-week cycles, you won't have time to build anything. Actually, basically, if you want to deliver a feature from A to Z, you need at least a couple more weeks. And if you do, I don't know, 3 months or 6 months projects, then you don't see the end of it. You don't have the sense of emergency, and so you don't work well enough. So the idea is that with 6-week cycle, it's really a good way to time product and development. The second key principle is about appetite. Traditionally, you specify a project and then you ask your developers how long it's going to take, how many resources you need to accomplish that project. And in this method, basically we take it the other way around. So the idea is to define a project that's worth working on, but then define how much appetite you have for this project. So how long you think it's worth working on it, and then once you've decided, okay, for this project, I want to bet six weeks on this project. It's worth working 6 weeks. Then you potentially reduce the scope if at the end of the 6 weeks you didn't complete the project. And the third key principle is about autonomy. So the entire method is about giving autonomy to the team, having people who can build and take feedback as they go.
And just so Alex,
yes.
I just launched the poll and 80% have no clue about the method. So maybe they don't have read already the big PDF about the shape-up method by Basecamp, and around 20% are thinking to implement the method, so they know quite a bit more.
Okay, great. So we'll see at the end if it changes. So basically there are 4 steps in the process. So the first one is called shaping. So that's when basically you sketch the high-level projects on which you want to work on. The second step is the betting table. So that's where you're going to decide on which projects you want to bet. That's sometimes a meeting held by the executive committee, and so they will choose the projects on which they want the company to work on. Sorry. The build phase, which is 6 weeks, as I explained, and then the cool down period, which is 2 weeks. And the idea there is to basically take a breath after the build phase, maybe work on some quick wins, on some bug fixes, etc. So in the end, you have a 2 months cycle with 6 weeks of build phase and 2 weeks of cooldown. And maybe one last word after starting the feedback about our experiences is that obviously ShapeUp is a method, so it's not gonna solve all your company's problem. It just gives you some new ideas, some key principles, and what we'll try to share basically this morning is the difference between the theory and the real life. And maybe what we added to the methodology so that it works well. So a few words about the context is that at Bleton we started last year, so we already have 6 cycles behind us, and the main reason why we implemented this framework was to give more visibility on the roadmap. At that time, we couldn't really commit on deadlines. We had difficulties to align the different teams, and we needed also a clear prioritization process. But we wanted to have autonomy in teams, which is really important for our culture. We wanted to avoid too many processes because, you know, if there are several other frameworks like Scrum, and we didn't want all the, you know, the overload of meetings and etc. And we wanted to avoid that, and also have a framework that lets us obviously focus on what's strategic, avoid being interrupted constantly with run issues, etc. And so we thought ShapeUp was a good fit for all of that. We started with one of our teams for a first cycle, and then we decided to basically scale it to the entire organization. Gabriel?
Yeah, do you mind maybe, I think with the animations, it's
Yes.
going to be just show me the whole slide and then I'll go over
Okay.
it. So at Allen, sorry, we're roughly 75 people in the product teams, already 100 hired but not started. France has pretty long hire to start time periods. So we started in September last year, and we've got 2 cycles done and had just started the 3rd cycle. The key goals for us were to try and increase the reliability of the short-term horizons that we had. They were previously 3 months, and we wanted to anticipate this growth of the team that would mean that we further needed to push distributed ownership, which is a key principle for us. We also wanted to help teams better separate their longer-term roadmaps and their shorter-term plans. It's important for us at Allen to keep in mind that we have a pre-existing context where teams are already very autonomous. We have fairly senior teams. We only have product designers. We don't separate between UI, UX designers. And so we already have an integrated system of crews that work on what we call zero-based budgeting. So on a regular basis, we'd question everything we were doing and drop problems that we thought were less important to solve. So yeah, that's why we decided to implement it, and how I think there's maybe one left. Yeah, so one important element that I may talk about a few times here is that we actually use parts of this methodology in conjunction with a tool that we've called the strategy pack, which is a single document that we keep continuously updated about the company's key goals, key objectives, and how we expect to measure those objectives. And that version strategy pack is really important in how we're then able to make decisions like the betting table in an asynchronous and distributed way. We also have another rule, which is that we try and keep crews to 4 engineers maximum. Julien?
Yeah, thanks. So we started using ShapeUp 1 year ago, a bit like Lifen. And I would say our tech team is a bit smaller. We are 25 people, including engineering, design, and product. So the main goals for us with this methodology, with this framework, was to basically align the whole company on clear goals. So from top executive to individual contributors. The other goal was to set a pace for the company where everyone would focus themselves on shaping during 2 weeks and then on building during 6 weeks. And then also, I think the other important aspect was to work with shorter deadlines, because before using this framework, we used to work on a quarter objective, and the engineering team, for example, had a hard time making an estimation and working with such a long period of time. So basically, we really like the 6 weeks objective because they are really easy to size, basically. And how do we do it? Basically, so we don't apply ShapeUp by the book, because ShapeUp tells you that only, I would say, lead developers and lead product managers should shape. And in our company, everybody in the company does the shaping. So it can be engineering, design, but also other business stakeholders. And then basically all the designers and engineers start building. And at the end, we also have a period where everybody in the company tests what was built. And yeah, also one important aspect is that in theory, ShapeUp tells you that you can run shaping and building in parallel, but we don't really apply that at MemoBank. We do 2 weeks of shaping only, and then we go to 6 weeks of building only, and we never do both in parallel.
Okay, so we'll now deep dive on each of the key steps of the framework. So let's start with the shaping phase. Very quickly, so at Lifen, we have mainly products and tech leads who will shape. Obviously, ideas can come from everybody, but the ownership of shaping will be led by product mostly, or engineering. On the left, you can see the framework that we use, the template we use for shapes. So again, it's really well defined in the framework, but the idea is to have a short pitch, define the problem you want to address, the appetite that you have for it, and sketch the idea of a solution. And again, it's really important. It's not a specification. You don't want to include exactly how you're going to build it, etc. That's really not the point. The idea is to explain why you want the company to focus on this project for a couple of weeks, for example. There are several things interesting to add that are interesting to add in the template as well. Is that the potential traps that you see in this project? That's very useful, so that people that will work on it anticipate potential dependencies or something like that. And also the what we call no-goes, which is what you don't want to include in this project, which is always a good thing to do in product, to define what you want to do, but also define what you don't want to do. And then we added, so these are the main steps of the framework, but we added also like success criteria and how this fits in our vision, and also like a follow-up section that we use to basically update at the end or after the cycle to make sure we delivered or not on this project. Another important thing is that the framework does not tell you what to do or what to shape. It really explains you how you can do it, etc. But you still need other frameworks to, to have a prioritization process, to have maybe business goals, or OKR, for example, is what we use to have the strategic goals. We also introduced what we call the stakeholder meetings, which is basically in the shaping phase, where we will collect the needs both from internal teams, but also from our customers, from the data, etc. And all of this feedback obviously will help us decide what to shape and help us shape it in a good way. And last word is that we try to shape a little more subject than what we can do in the cycle, so that at the betting table there is a real decision process to choose what to do.
Thanks, Alexandre. So I think a lot of the commonalities with Lifen that we have in our shaping process are not worth repeating. A lot of the questions around why this problem is worth solving and solving now are also in what we call a brief. We try to tie it back to the latest version of our strategy pack, which helps include the connection to the business goals. And the only two other things that I maybe wanted to highlight is that we do actually really insist on the risks and the questions that we still have. It's a concept that we'll come back to later in the presentation, but in any given project, it's quite important to be able to differentiate between projects that we think may be very well defined and projects that we know have a lot of unknowns and potentially a lot of risk associated with them. So we actually insist quite a bit on this particular section. In our case, those risks can come from multiple directions. We're not like Basecamp in that we don't just build SaaS software. We're an insurance tech company, and so there are rules and laws and money involved, which means that we have to, in some cases, appreciate risk and anticipate it a little differently from the way Basecamp works. We actually freeze the strategy pack 2 weeks before the end of a cycle, so that as briefs are being finalized, they're all working on the same notion of reality and priorities and don't end up contradicting each other on what the key top goals of the company are. Yeah. So the actual format and details, I'm happy to go into any additional level of granularity with you on, but those are the key concepts, and that's how we do shaping it out. Julien?
Yes. So I won't repeat what was said before, but basically how we do it is everyone can submit their ID and write a short pitch, like 10 lines, to sell basically their IDs to the product team and to the executive in the company. And then every 8 weeks, we organize what we call a shaping table, where we list all the pitch and ideas, and we see how they fit with the company strategy, basically. Then we shortlist a number of topics, pretty quite in I would say in accordance, like relative to our appetite. So I know Leifen, they shape more than what they can build, but at Memo we like to shape as much as we can build, because in the past we used to shape topics and we didn't build them right away, and so it creates basically stocks, and stocks is an issue because maybe two months or 4 months later the idea you had is not doable anymore because your system has changed, because your strategy has changed, and because of many different factors. So we try to limit the amount of shaping basically as much as possible. And basically, because we want to keep things very simple, we use one and only one document during the whole cycle. So we use the same document for the pitch, for the shaping phase, where basically the team sit down and try to find a solution to the problem, and also for the building phase, where we decide how we want to deliver it, and we do some project management about engineering and design progress, basically.
Okay, maybe we can take a short break to see if you have questions related to these two phases. Maybe you can ask them in the chat, and Sarah, if you see them, don't hesitate to ask them.
Yeah. Any question on this first part about the shaping, or was it clear for everybody? I know that most of you didn't know the method before, so maybe you're just discovering what shaping is, and that's okay. But if you have some of the questions, of course you can ask. Yes, I will share I have a question. Yes, I will share the presentation. We're going to share the presentation at the end. So I will post it on the Slack, and I will send it per email. And you will have also the recording available as well for maybe your team or people you may know. I have a question about prioritization. How do you prioritize discovery? And you do all of it before the shape up? And another question, do you reorg, change the squads, crew after every cycle, especially when the team is growing and you are hiring? Who wants to take maybe the first one? And another, I had a very similar question. How does this framework relate to the discovery and delivery activities?
Yes, it's a very good question, and basically, from what I remember about the framework, it doesn't really talk about discovery. I don't know, Gabriel, and Julien, if you have another idea, but basically, for us, it has to happen. I mean, it's like the products work outside of ShapeUp, and one of the actually key challenge is that when you're in these cycles, you don't necessarily have time for discovery in the same time, and so it's actually hard to manage. I don't know if you want to share some best practice about it.
I agree with you. Basically, we are currently struggling to basically integrate our discovery process with ShapeUp, and it's exactly what you said. It's like the responsibility of the product team to run it during the whole cycle. But basically, because we have more time during the building phase, we usually do it during the building phase, and we try to prepare the next shaping phase according to our discovery findings. But yeah, it's, as you mentioned, it's not, ShapeUp doesn't mention anything about discovery, so it's, you have to find your own, adapt the framework to your own needs, basically.
Yeah, maybe just a bit of context about Basecamp. Basecamp's a great company at marketing itself, but it's important to remember that the entire company is 50 people and the entire product team is roughly 12 people. they also just produce software. So they have very little to no connection to a regulated environment. For those of you who are managing products that are actually dealing with reality and have to integrate and face it, that may be a constraint that is under indexed on in the methodology. So on discovery, I think discovery and road mapping, those are concepts that are different from the principles of ShapeUp. And at Allen, we try to work on continuous processes for both. Many of the problems that we decide to prioritize on are rarely just landing in our lap fresh and completely new. They're the result of a continuous feedback loop that we try to evaluate as such. The one question that I really found interesting that I wanted to bounce back on is like, do the crews restart at every cycle, and how do you work with this into the context of hiring and growth? At Allen, we always had the notion that crews, once their mission was accomplished, would just go back to non-existence and have to justify their existence. And one source of inspiration for that is zero-based budgeting from Amazon, where the leads of large teams would have to explain at the end of a budget cycle, not why their team should grow, but why their team should exist at all, trying to separate the concepts of run and maintenance as needing to exist, and really forcing the teams to explain what they were going to add as value to the overall business, rather than just continue to justify their existence. People can always do more with more people, but that's one of the interesting concepts of zero-based budgeting. We actually want to more aggressively implement some aspects of ShapeUp in order to accommodate the growth of teams. We don't really believe that people on the product teams at Allen are highly effective for the first 3 to 4 months of their time at the company. So we don't really worry about which cycle they start their first day in. We have a woodchuck program, which engineers will join in their first 6 to 8 weeks. And product designers will generally join the design studio, which is one of the ways we allocate design resources. And all these processes act as a buffer. But we do believe in the ability for a crew, once its mission has been resolved, to fundamentally have to explain to the company, hey, this stack needs 0 to this much maintenance. This is the behavior we expect to have to provide run support on. But that doesn't mean that we have to solve problems in this exact space or on this exact product or on this exact feature. We want to go back to the strategy pack and understand what the highest possible deployment of this team on impact can be for the 6 to 8 weeks. And what we found quite powerful is that it actually does push us to ask ourselves, what is the value of keeping a team there rather than keeping none at all? Recently, we completely got rid of our claims management team for 6 weeks just to see. We're an insurance company, a healthcare insurance company. So claims management is literally the engine room of our entire business. But the team believed that it was stable enough that it didn't actually need a lot of support. And for 8 weeks, the engineers went to work on separate problems. We ended up having a few incidents, and those were fixed as incidents are and should be, which is not part of the ShapeUp methodology. But other than that, we didn't believe that we had to continue working on the claims management engine. And it really helped engineers look at a different part of the company. And then when they did regroup, they had a very clear idea of prioritized projects that they believed can contribute to the company.
Okay, there is a question, and you mentioned a little bit in your answer, Gabriel, about the OKRs, and how do you align the 8-week cycle with the rest of the company when the company works in quarterly OKRs?
Well,
yeah,
go ahead, sorry.
I'll take a stab at it, and then Alexandre fill me in. We have moved to cycles, and the company has not moved to cycles for business reporting or board meetings. And I think there are some realities that are outside of the company that kind of are easy to manage on quarters. The key ones for us are board meetings, which actually happen on calendar quarters, personal improvement plans, which people publish at Allen on a quarterly basis generally, and business goals for growth of the customers. But when you think about it, very few of the actual business goals are tied to the exact delivery date of software. Generally, the resulting business goal is the outcome of that software being made, then shipped, then rolled out, then supported. And so even if you try to have a company on a quarterly basis, you're often looking at apples and oranges anyway, because you're not going to hit 155,000 customers in Q2 because you ship project X in Q2.
So it's running in parallel. And and after we will have this question of culture. I think it's later on.
Maybe Sarah, I think I see that there are many questions, and it's great. maybe we can finish, the key concepts, because if people are not familiar, maybe it's good if we have a first good overview, and then we can take all the questions.
Yes.
So I'll go back to step 2, which is the betting table, and maybe we can go fast so that we have a lot of time for questions. As I see, there are plenty. So on the betting table, basically for us, it's an actual meeting where people are going to pitch their projects, their shapes, to the executive committee, the management team. One of the key feedback I have on this phase is that, as Gabriel mentioned, not all companies are like Basecamp. And so we have a much bigger team. We have several products. And so we try to do one single betting table, and that's what we do. But you have 20 to 30 pitches at this betting table on various topics. It's actually quite a headache to just load everything in your mind and try to make good decisions. So we introduced a few tweaks to the framework. One of them, and which is something that's really working well, is what we call program pitches. And so that the teams will not present a list of subjects, but like group of subjects. For example, we can go project A, B, and C, or we can go project A, B, and D. But in both cases, we need project A and B, etc. And so this makes the decision process much simpler, and it also gives more autonomy to the team, because they can actually suggest how to basically pick and select. So that's one interesting thing. The second thing, and I think there was also a question with OKR, which is as I said before, you still need a framework for your strategy, and then you have people that will construct shapes based on that strategy, and the strategy can take the form of OKRs, for example. That's what we use. And we had a very simple way to fix the problems about the cycles, is that we decided that the company would do OKRs every 4 months. So we do 3 times in a year. And this then perfectly aligns with the Shape Up methodology. But again, as Gabriel said, it's true that there is no direct link, because at the end of a cycle, you don't have the business outcome generally. The business outcome will come further after. Another important thing is that we have a couple days between the betting table and the start of the cycle, just to make the adjustment, and actually to compose the several teams that will do the project. So that was another question, which is around teams. And what we would do is we would create teams dedicated for the project during the cycle. Some teams can last over a couple cycles, but we tried as much as possible to build new teams for the projects. Back to you, Gab. All right.
Yeah, so we have a couple of important working methods that we believe in and didn't want to give up because of Shape Up. One is distributed ownership, another one is transparency, and a third one is a reliance on the written method. So we try to minimize meetings with more than 2 people in them. And we've tried to stay true to that. So our betting table is actually asynchronous, and it happens in a spreadsheet and a Slack channel mostly. We also use GitHub issues to resolve deeper problems, but I won't go into more detail there. The really important steps that we try to bring out are, first of all, have a strategy pack that's clear. So people bring briefs that they believe align with the strategy pack. That allows you to eliminate briefs that actually don't align with the strategy pack to live with. The second one is that these objectives have to connect. So you can always ask, why, and bring yourself back to the mission of the company when you look at a brief. What we also bake in very transparently is community constraints. Our communities are the different groups of product jobs. So like data community, PM community, engineering community, design community. And from those constraints, we very clearly try to explain how many different bets we think we can make in any given period. So we say ahead of time, hey, we don't think we can do a great job at more than 8 bets, for example. And that also helps streamline. And then we work the final arbitrages in the spreadsheet and in Slack so that they're also transparently available. That actually allows one thing which has great value, is that because everything's already written down, staffing can start in parallel, and engineers can already start seeing, okay, this brief is likely to not be prioritized. This brief is likely to need more appetite than was initially thought of. And that makes the staffing period a lot shorter. And we currently do staffing around 24 hours. We opened it on Monday and we closed it on Tuesday at 4 p.m. this week. And then we give teams a week to finally ramp up. That's the last thing I wanted to mention after the betting table.
So at Memo Bank, basically the betting table is done synchronously. So it's basically a 2 hours meeting where we review all the shaped topics. So basically it's usually between 10 and 15. We deep dive in some of them. We try sometimes to challenge the scope and reduce it. And then we size basically our appetite by doing some kind of HR planning, as we call it. So we take all the planning for all the engineers and designers. We see if they go on holidays, we see how much they need to focus on fixing production bugs or doing management if they are team lead and so on. And basically we try to match the time we have, the available time we have, with the topics who are the most important for us. And the difference with the methodology and also how Alex and Gabriel are applying this method is that we start right away the building. We don't have any cool down. So basically we do what we call the betting table or the strategy meeting on Friday. So basically the next one is tomorrow. Actually, you have the real planning on the left. And we start the next phase of the cycle. So in this case, it's another shaping, but after the betting table is usually it's the beginning of the building. So we start right away. There is no cool down, and basically we have to go very fast at the beginning of the cycle to reduce uncertainty. And we will deep dive on that topic in the next part, because we will focus on how the building goes.
Okay, thanks. Moving to the building phase, I'll try to give maybe the most important idea here. So basically for us, there is like a normal way to do it. So we have several rituals during the cycle, and it works like a feature team basically. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but there are maybe a couple ideas that are interesting in the framework. So the first one is scope hammering. As I mentioned, you have a you have a fixed time, and you can reduce the scope, and that's the very important aspect of the ShapeUp framework. And the other one is done means deployed. So which means you're not doing some development work during the cycle and you will deploy it at the end, after. You have to ideally deploy continuously during your cycle, so that maybe you have even the first feedback from what you're trying to build during the cycle, and you can adjust it. So again, I'm not going to lie to you, that's the theory. We don't always achieve it, and sometimes the deployment happens a couple days before the end of the cycle or a couple days after, and I'm pretty sure you, Julien and Gabriel, will not contradict me in saying that it's really hard. And I believe because teams want to get as much done as possible, and so obviously they think, okay, I still have 3 days left, so I'll do that, etc. And it really needs a lot of sharpness to actually stop and say, okay, it's better to ship this, even if the scope is slightly smaller, than not to ship anything during the cycle. And that's really hard to do. And last but not least, about reporting. So Basecamp shows us this yield charts, which is a way to report the status of the projects, which is interesting. the main idea is that when you start a project, you have a lot of unknowns. You have a lot of things that you don't know how you're going to build them. And then as you go into it, you understand exactly what you need to do. And then you go basically downhill. So the first phase is uphill. It's really hard to know what you're going to do. You don't see the end, basically, you don't see the end of the project. But when you're up, then you know what you have to do is just pure execution, and you're downhill. And so we use these little hill charts to show basically where are our projects during the cycle. Are we still trying to figure out what to do, or we are just executing it? And I think it's a really interesting way to report status.
I'm trying to summarize what I think the most important points of this slide for us at Allen are. And if I were to keep two things, one is the key principles, which we rely on to give teams autonomy. And those are product principles. Every company has them. They may not be formalized, but they have like a certain way to build things. And for us, it's important to repeat them to ourselves. The second one is on communication. I put on the left the way we ask crews to communicate, rather than use the term report, to communicate to the company weekly with these 5 sections. They don't all have to be filled in every week, but they have to be filled in that structure when they do make sense. And it makes it a lot easier for the rest of the company to understand how things are moving, which is one of the ways to actually see the hill chart playing out, especially as we've tried to encourage teams to use fairly systematic terms to describe what they're putting in the section. I'll give a few examples. We use the terms learnt, made, shipped, member friction. And these are all ways to try and explain with a label what kind of problem is happening or what kind of breakthrough we've just had. One that we feel really important in this context is the learnt one, because that actually allows you to see the team moving up the hill and then hopefully down the hill when they're executing. Many of the points that Alexandre make, we also have at Allen. Again, happy to detail that if we have time at the end. But it's mainly on communicating with this kind of structure that we're now sort of 80 in the product teams to still have a fairly good view of teams getting lost and help them course correct early enough.
I will go very quickly because most of the thing we apply at MemoBank have already been said, but basically, yeah, I agree. It's a lot about over communicating with the rest of the team, especially at the beginning of the building, because you don't know much and you make new discoveries very regularly. And basically the goal of the team is to reduce the uncertainty, sorry, as soon as possible, because as soon as you know where you're going, you can discuss with the rest of the team if you need to reduce the scope. You can give update the rest of the company on where this is going. You can update the marketing and sales team of the content, about the content of the feature that's going to be shipped, because basically the content can change from the beginning of the cycle between the beginning and the end. So basically, yeah, you have to help the team basically go up the hill at the beginning, and then the product team use the end of the cycle to prepare the demo and to do some discovery to prepare basically the next shaping phase.
Okay, so let's try to summarize the key takeaways and maybe answer a few questions. So first, maybe do we love the framework? The answer is yes. I think we really achieved the main goals, which was alignment, communication, prioritization process. It's great. Obviously, there are many things we can improve, and that's what I want to focus on. So maybe the first thing, as mentioned, you still need a process for defining your business goals and your strategy, and it will basically help you choose what to shape and which shapes you want to bet on. Another idea that we introduced was to have some people dedicated to a build. Obviously, most of the people we want to have them in the build team, which is in the cycles, but we still have a few engineers that are in a protection team. and this team basically will handle the day-to-day problems and avoid interrupting people that are building. The other thing that is quite challenging with ShapeUp is how to work with quick wins. I think maybe it's a question like small improvements. The idea in ShapeUp is to do them in the cooldown. So 2 weeks you have between phases, but sometimes it's not enough. So yeah, it's one of the things that we're still trying to figure out. Other key learnings, programs I talked about, try to keep shapes high level, because if you start to specify shapes like Jira cards, well, you're just completely going the wrong way. So shapes have to stay high level. I think it's one of the most important thing. And last but not least is something we're trying to introduce now, which is the sort of post-cycle analysis. Because one of the key challenges is that you're working on a cycle, you ship your products or your features at the end of the cycle, and then you start right away a new cycle. And sometimes you don't have the time or you don't have the time to step back and analyze the data about what you've shipped in the first cycle, and you're already in the second cycle. And that's something actually quite hard, because you can move to other projects and forget about what you've done just before, and obviously it's not what you want. You want accountability. You want to make sure that what you've delivered actually meets the goals you defined early on. So we're trying to introduce a notion where frequently we review basically the data from previous cycles, and it's also going to help us make new bets in future cycles, and basically iterate, which was one of the other questions.
Thanks, Alexandre. I'm just going to make 2 points, and I agree with most of everything of what Alexandre covered. The other points that I believe are important were to just like explain how the strategy is changing. That's what we achieved with the strategy pack, and that helps remove a lot of problems downstream. Those are not addressed in the ShapeUp book, but I believe it's really important to fix that. Otherwise, you're going to end up overloading the betting table with strategy questions, when the betting table is designed to serve as a clearinghouse, but it can only serve as a clearinghouse if it has clear principles to work on. The second point is that the actual planning should go into quite a lot of detail on the time that engineers have. 100% is generally 70%, and 70% is sometimes 50%, especially on a 6 to 7 week period in France, where some people may want to take 2 or 3 weeks off. So it's actually worth the effort to go into a certain amount of detail. And then again, on the weaponization of communication, one tool we found quite useful is that product announcements force teams to explain to the company very clearly what has been achieved, which is one way to also push clarity of thought. Just go to the next slide. We're relatively happy and excited. We're very optimistic. I think we still want to work on how we can kill briefs before they even make it to the shaping stage. So that's what I want to point out, is like before shaping, there's sort of an outline verb, and maybe the outline is enough to sometimes kill it for now. Some of the points that I've already touched upon are that when you're not just in pure SaaS, when you have a reality to deal with, sometimes some elements are a little different. And it's important to take ShapeUp with a grain of salt, not to forget that it's also a marketing tool for Basecamp, right? And for us, what's next is to try and understand if cooldown is something we lean into. We currently have 1 week, and we're wondering if we're going to extend that to 2 weeks. We have pretty positive feedback from the team so far. The second one is to also formalize areas of ownership that are different from what we are currently working on today. And that's a very big distinction. So for data, for design, for products, what you do today doesn't define what you're an expert on. And we should be clear on how that expertise is growing across the company.
So yeah, on this slide, I will just make one point. Basically, your building phase can be really affected by your business. And basically, because we are a bank, we have a regulated activity. It means several things. It means that we have the exec board needs to review basically what goes into production before. So it means that at some point, your production, your release system is not entirely streamlined, and you need a validation, because what goes into production affects basically our customer money. And also basically the time of the engineers during the shaping period is also allocated to fixing non-urgent bugs, which is basically not really mentioned by ShapeUp at all. But this is a way we have found to make sure during the building phase they are focused on what we are building, and during the shaping phase they can split their time between shaping and fixing smaller stuff, which was, I think, a question in the chat. You can now move to the next slide. So do we love it? Yes, we do love it. But after a 6 cycle, we have found like several difficulties and several potential improvements. I would say this framework is great because it gives a pace, it gives lots of visibility to the company, but it's also a commitment on 6 weeks, so you have a hard time changing basically the course of things and adapting to short-term opportunities or short-term events. It's very hard also when you talk a lot with external partners to adapt their planning and their deadline with your own framework. Basically, if you want to sign a contract with a provider, integrate their solution in your system, how do you make both planning match together? It's very tough. And also, the shaping team and the building team change very often, and sometimes it can lack a bit of ownership, and it can create basically there is a new learning curve on every new building, because either the engineers or product managers must understand and go back to what was built before. So that's kind of main difficulties we have at the moment. And we also have many improvements coming. So we are thinking about adding a cool down phase, because at the moment it's very intense to go from shaping to building to shaping to building. And we would also like to integrate discovery even more in the process, to make it official in the process, which is not the case at the moment. But yeah, it's a great method. We are very happy with it, but it's just a framework. It's not perfect, and basically, yeah, you should adapt it to your own business and company culture. I think it's
great. I think
done. Yeah.
there is just 1 minute left. Thank you. It was really interesting, and I think, as we can see in the chat, the participants really liked it. Maybe one last question, if you want to ask, or everything was super clear. Yes, we have people that thanks you guys, so it was cool. We try to prepare as much as possible to get you all the feedbacks in just 1 hour. Okay, great format, super clear, incredibly useful. Okay, I think
maybe I can just answer this question about huge projects, because it's a really interesting one. So the idea, as I mentioned, is to slice it down into smaller bits, obviously. And what's interesting in the framework is that they say that basically at each betting table, you will ask yourself, do we actually want to do this huge project? And with other frameworks, maybe it's it's assumed. It's like, okay, we already committed 6 months in these projects, so we have to do the next 3 months. It's the sunk cost idea. And with ShapeUp, you have to basically defend the next phases of your project at each betting table, which I think is a good thing to do.
Thank you, Alex. I think it's the end, and it's 10 o'clock. So thank you very much. Thanks to our 3 speakers today. Thanks for attending, all the participants. Stay tuned for our next webinar. I will send the presentation and I will also make available the recording for